Hi all, Mr. Thomas here and welcome to Virtual Geography. We're continuing our investigation into all things tectonic by looking at the tectonic plates, the boundaries at which these plates meet, and we're going to even do a little bit of a challenge for you to do at home. So, with that said, let's get your game faces on and let's begin. So let's begin today's lesson with a quick recap of what we did last Monday, which was our last natural hazards virtual geography lesson. In the last lesson, we looked at the structure of the Earth, convection currents, and tectonic plates. So if you haven't seen that video yet, and you don't know about tectonic plates and convection currents, I recommend you go back and watch that video now. There's a card on screen for you to click on, so pause this video, go see that one first, and then come back. But if you stayed, let's get on with today's learning. We'll begin with convection currents, which are huge rotating cycles of molten magma movement within the mantle. There's a lot of M's there. Convection currents drive the movement of the tectonic plates above them, and this is what we're going to begin with today. So tectonic plates are pushed by the convection currents below them. So if we have two convection currents that converge, as you can see on the diagram, the plates above will also converge. This means that they'll come together. And if you have two convection currents that diverge, so split apart, as shown on the diagram, the plates above will also diverge. The places where these plates converge and diverge, we call plate boundaries. Behind me is a map of the world, but instead of it highlighting countries and continents, it highlights the tectonic plates that make up the crust of our planet. Each tectonic plate has a name and a direction of movement, indicated by the arrow upon it. On the map behind me, you can also see the plate boundaries. This is where two or more plates meet, and there are four different types of plate boundary. When tectonic plates move away from each other or depart in opposite directions, we call that a constructive plate boundary. At constructive plate boundaries, two or more tectonic plates move away from each other, leaving a gap within the crust. At this gap, magma rises up from the mantle and solidifies, forming volcanoes and volcanic islands. Okay, time for a fun fact and a revision tip all rolled into one. Magma is molten rock in the mantle, whereas lava is molten rock that comes out of the land, like from a volcano. And so here's a really easy way to remember which one is which. If it's from the mantle, then it starts with Ma, and so it's magma. Whereas if it comes out of the land, it starts with La, and it's lava. So let's throw this back to our constructive plate boundary. Sometimes earthquakes can occur there. However, the earthquakes and volcanoes that occur at a constructive plate boundary tend to be less violent than those found at the other plate boundary type. A great example of a constructive plate boundary is the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. And sitting at the northern end of the Mid-Atlantic Ridge is Iceland. Iceland is a volcanic island found sitting right on top of the constructive plate boundary between the North American and Eurasian plate. Our next plate boundary is a little more violent. At a destructive plate boundary, a heavier oceanic plate subducts or goes underneath a lighter continental plate. As the oceanic plate subducts, it begins to melt and forms brand new magma. Under immense pressure, this magma is released in violent volcanic eruptions. Additionally, on top of the violent volcanic eruptions, pressure can build between the plates. And when this pressure is suddenly released, it is released in the form of powerful earthquakes. So at a destructive plate boundary, we have violent volcanoes, violent earthquakes. Kind of works with the destructive name, doesn't it? For our destructive plate boundary example, let's look to Japan. Japan is situated on the Eurasian plate. However, to the east of Japan is the Japan Trench. The Japan Trench is where the oceanic Pacific plate subducts underneath the continental Eurasian plate. And this is why Japan is struck by such violent volcanoes and powerful earthquakes, like the one that hit Japan in 2011. So our third plate boundary is the conservative plate boundary. This is where plates will slide past each other in either opposite directions or in the same direction, just at different speeds. A buildup of friction between the two plates sliding past each other can sometimes lead to the release of incredibly powerful earthquakes. However, there's no volcanoes, so look on the bright side, I guess. At the San Andreas fault line in California, the Pacific plate is moving quicker than its neighbouring North American plate. However, both plates are moving in the same direction. This has caused severe earthquakes in the past. such as the one that struck Northern California in 1906. Modern calculations believe that this earthquake killed 3,000 people and left 250,000 homeless. So our last plate boundary is a collision plate boundary, sometimes called collision zones and sometimes called convergent mountain building zones. However, for the GCSE spec and for this video, we're going to be calling them collision plate boundaries. At collision plate boundaries, two continental plates will move toward each other and collide. As both of these plates are continental plates, they have the same density, and so neither of them subduct. Instead, they push upwards, creating fold mountains. At collision plate boundaries, powerful earthquakes can strike. However, once again, no volcanoes, just like at a conservative plate boundary. Our example for a collision plate boundary will be the Himalayas, which occur between the Indian plate and the Eurasian plate. This leads on to this fun little technicality. Whoever climbed Mount Everest most recently is technically the world record holder for climbing to the highest altitude. As Mount Everest is on a collision plate boundary, the plates push the mountains upward. This means that year upon year, Mount Everest actually gets taller, and so whoever climbed it most recently has technically climbed to the highest altitude. So those are the four types of plate boundary: constructive, destructive, conservative, collision. And so with that said, it's time to head on to the challenge that I mentioned at the start of the video. We call this little challenge Tectonic Taekwondo, which is inspired by Tectonic Kung Fu, taught to me by Mr. Strachan, one of my geography teachers when I was in school. Tectonic Taekwondo is designed to help you memorize the four types of plate boundary and their movements. So there are four Tectonic Taekwondo moves. Constructive, where your palms start together and pull apart, just like at a constructive plate boundary. You then have destructive, where one of your arms subducts underneath the other arm, just like at a destructive plate boundary. We then move on to conservative, where your forearms slide past each other in opposite directions. And finally, we have collision, where your palms collide and rise up, forming fold mountains, just like the Himalayas. So now you know the moves, let's do a practice run. 3, 2, 1. Constructive, destructive, conservative, collision. So that was the practice. Let's move on to the warm-up. So in 3, 2, 1. Constructive, collision, destructive, constructive, collision, conservative. Hopefully that wasn't too bad, but now here's the challenge. Let's see if you can do the following sequence. And if you can master it, see how quickly you can do it. Welcome, challenger. This is the challenge. I'm going to say the pattern to you, and you have to follow along with the corresponding movements. Let's see if you can succeed. So, in 3, 2, 1. Constructive, destructive, collision. Constructive, collision, conservative. Destructive, collision, constructive, destructive, and collision. So with our short stint into physical activity completed, it's time to end the video. So, as always, there is a worksheet and answer sheet in the description below. And with that said, it's time to pack up, subscribe to the channel, and I will see you in the next video. Dismissed. Staying behind after class, I see? Well, welcome to the bloopers and outtakes section. A section I add onto the end of all of my videos to show you that everyone makes mistakes. Learning is hard, and you'll find that from time to time you mess up, and that's completely okay. Without a bit of practice, you can't be perfect. So, to emphasize that point, here are all the funny times I messed up making this video for you today. So, sit back, relax, and enjoy the bloopers and outtakes. A quick recap into our last natural hazards geography lesson. We looked at the structure of the Earth and introduced the tectonic plates. If you don't know about tectonic plates or convection currents within the mantle, I recommend you click on the card on screen right now. The tectonic plates are pushed by the convection currents below them. So, if you have two convection currents that converge, oh no, I did diverge, I need it, yeah. And if you have two convection currents that diverge on the diagram, you'll also see the plates diverge. The places where these plates converge and diverge, we call plate boundaries. Boosh! Yes, mate. Yes, mate. Ho! Talk about it, oh yeah. The Japan Trench is where the continental Eurasian plate meets the oceanic Pacific plate, and this is why Japan is struck by powerful earthquakes and violent volcanoes, such as the 2011 Japan. Oh no! Oh my lord. So our third plate boundary is a conservative plate boundary. Okay, let's stop that. So our third plate boundary is the conservative plate boundary. This is where plates will slide past each other in either opposite directions or in the same direction, just at different speeds. Yeah, if anyone actually can do that challenge, send it to me on Twitter at Mr. Thomas LM. I'll be very impressed if you can do it.